The bandage on her cheekbone should have been background noise. Just another imperfection on another invisible woman who emptied his trash and polished his Italian marble twice a week. But when Rhonda Brown's entire body went rigid at the sound of Young Ho's footsteps, not the usual careful stillness of Maid, but the frozen terror of prey, something volcanic erupted beneath 15 years of calculated emptiness. He'd ordered men buried alive for disrespecting his name. The fear carved into her posture was a different kind of disrespect entirely. "Who did this to you?" His voice was surgical, precise, the same inflection he used when explaining to debtors exactly which bones would break first. Rhonda's hand flew to her cheek, fingers pressing the flesh-colored bandage as if she could make it disappear. "Nobody, Mr. Calm. The bathroom cabinet. I wasn't paying attention." Young Ho moved 3 steps closer. She moved 4 steps back, her spine hitting the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Los Angeles. That retreat, that instinctive mathematics of distance and survival, it detonated something in him that had nothing to do with the silk-suited empire he'd built on extortion and blood money, and everything to do with the way she just confirmed she knew exactly what dangerous men look like. Please subscribe to the Chanel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue. Young Ho Kong owned Los Angeles the way other men own watches, with casual brutality and zero sentimentality. His empire stretched from the shipping containers at the port of Long Beach to the underground gambling dens in Koreatown, held together by a network of debts, threats, and the kind of violence that didn't make the news because the bodies were never stupid enough to surface. He was 33 years old. He'd killed his first man at 19. The federal government had been building a case against him for 4 years and hadn't managed to make a single charge stick because witnesses developed sudden amnesia or sudden disappearances, whichever proved more convenient. His penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room overlooking a conquered kingdom. 1,600 square feet of marble, steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass that cost more per month than most families earned in a year. He held court there every Tuesday and Friday, receiving lieutenants who brought him percentages in leather briefcases and problems wrapped in fearful explanations. Young Ho solved problems efficiently, permanently. The only person permitted in his space outside of business hours was the cleaning woman. Tuesdays and Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. She arrived silent, worked invisible, and left without a trace beyond the scent of lemon polish in the absence of dust. He'd never bothered learning her name until 3 weeks ago. Rhonda Brown woke up at 4:47 a.m. every morning because her son Micah needed to be at the before-school program by 6:30, and the bus from Inglewood took 42 minutes when traffic cooperated and an hour 15 when it didn't. She worked the breakfast shift at a diner in Culver City from 7 to 11:30, served lunch at a corporate cafeteria downtown from 12:30 to 3 o'clock, and cleaned 4 private residences between 4 o'clock and 10 p.m., including the penthouse that paid her $300 cash every week. No taxes, no questions, no eye contact. The eviction notice had been taped to her apartment door for 11 days. Past due balance, $2,847. She was $800 short even after selling her grandmother's wedding ring to a pawn shop on Crenshaw that offered her a third of what it was worth and still made her feel like a thief. Micah didn't know. 7 years old, gap-toothed and brilliant, utterly convinced his mama could fix anything because she always had. Devin had stopped paying child support 6 months ago, right around the time his new girlfriend moved into the apartment Rhonda used to share with him. He'd started showing up drunk instead, reminding her exactly why she'd left, demonstrated with his fists why she should have left sooner. The bandage covered the most recent lesson. Rhonda moved through Young Ho's penthouse like a ghost, polishing chrome fixtures and pretending she couldn't feel the weight of his stare, tracking her reflection in the glass. Micah got an A on his spelling test last Thursday. Young Ho said it the way someone might comment on the weather. Casual, inevitable, as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the center of Rhonda's chest. She froze halfway through folding his Egyptian cotton sheets, the fabric slipping through her fingers like water. The penthouse suddenly felt airless, the floor-to-ceiling windows pressing inward despite the sprawling Los Angeles skyline beyond them. "How do you?" Jefferson Elementary. Mrs. Park's second-grade class. He walks there by himself most mornings because you're already on the bus to your shift at the hospital laundry. Young-ho didn't move from where he leaned against the marble kitchen island, arms crossed, watching her with that unblinking focus that made her skin feel transparent. You pack his lunch the night before. Peanut butter sandwiches cut into triangles. The crust's on because he likes them. Rhonda's mouth opened, closed, her pulse hammered against her throat like something trying to escape. Mr. Kong, I don't. You check out library books every Tuesday. Last week it was something about urban gardening. The week before, a cookbook on soul food. His voice remained surgical, each word precise incision. You hum his eye is on the sparrow when you think no one's listening. Always the third verse, never the first. The room tilted. This wasn't casual observation. This was surveillance. The kind of attention that preceded violence. Disappeared women. Cautionary tales whispered in Korean grocery stores about girls who saw too much. She should run. Should grab Micah from school and disappear into a different city, a different name, a different life constructed from bus tickets and cash-only motel rooms. But her feet stayed planted on his heated Italian tile. Why? The word scraped out of her, raw and small. Young-ho's expression shifted. Something almost like pain flickering across features trained to reveal nothing. Because you matter, Rhonda. Her name, not the maid or you or the careful absence of acknowledgement she weaponized for survival. Her actual name, shaped by his accent into something that sounded almost like a hymn. I've spent 8 months trying to understand why I notice when you're late. Why I know you rub your left hip when it rains, because your ex broke it and it never healed right. Why I want to burn down the world when I see you flinch. He pushed off the counter, and she didn't retreat. Couldn't. The confession pinned her more effectively than any threat. I know your name, Rhonda. I know your son's name. I know you're afraid of me. Young-ho stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved beneath his control. And I know you shouldn't be. Not from me. Never from me. The vow hung between them like a blade that could either kill or protect, and Rhonda realized with crystalline, terrifying clarity that she believed him. Rhonda's apartment smelled like lavender air freshener trying to mask mildew. Young-ho stood in her doorway at 9:15 on a Tuesday night. Still wearing the charcoal suit he negotiated a port deal in 6 hours earlier, and the wrongness of him in this space. His Patek Philippe watch worth more than her annual rent. His Italian shoes on her peeling linoleum made her ribs ache. I need a name. His voice was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. You need to leave. Rhonda's arms crossed over her chest, defensive, protective. Micah's asleep in the next room. You can't just show up here. The man who put his hands on you. I need his name. No. The word came out strangled. No, you don't understand. If something happens to him, the police will ask questions. They'll look at me and I can't. Her breath hitched. I can't lose Micah. I can't have anyone looking too close at my life. Young-ho moved into her apartment, closing the door with a gentleness that didn't match the murder in his eyes. No harm will come to your son. You have my word. Your word? Rhonda laughed, bitter and afraid. You run drugs through the port. You own half the underground gambling in Koreatown. Your word is worth exactly what you need it to be worth. My word to you, Young-ho said, each syllable deliberate, is the only promise I've made in 15 years that I intend to keep. No harm will come to Micah. Not from me. Not from anyone connected to me. Not from the fallout of what I'm about to do. The apartment's cheap overhead light cast shadows across his face, and for one suspended moment, Rhonda saw him exactly as he was. A man who'd spent his entire adult life building an empire on violence, standing in her kitchen like he'd burned the empire down for a woman whose last name he'd learned from her employee file 3 days ago. Devin. The name escaped her like a confession. Devin Mitchell. He lives in Inglewood. Works security at the Forum. Drives a black Dodge Charger with a custom license plate that says Alpha 1. The details poured out in a rush because she'd memorized them the way you memorize exit routes in a burning building. He thinks I still love him. He thinks if he hurts me enough, I'll come back. Young-ho's expression didn't change. That was the terrifying part. His face remained perfectly still, perfectly calm, but something in his eyes transformed into something primordial and final, the exact expression his ancestors might have worn before walking into battle knowing they wouldn't return. "He's wrong," Young Ho said simply. Then he was gone, and Rhonda stood alone in her kitchen, lavender air freshener and mildew, knowing with absolute certainty that she'd just killed a man with 6 syllables. Devin Mitchell would never touch anyone again. The restaurant didn't look like much on the outside, just another weathered storefront in Koreatown with faded Hangul characters above the door. But the moment Young Ho's hand pressed against Rhonda's lower back, guiding her and Micah through the entrance, she understood this was sacred ground. The kind of place a man with blood on his hands came to remember he'd once been someone's son. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up from her inventory clipboard, and her entire face transformed. She said something rapid in Korean, her voice pitched between delight and accusation, and Young Ho responded in the same language, softer than Rhonda had ever heard him speak. The conversation felt like watching a knife being carefully sheathed. "My mother," Young Ho said, though Rhonda had already guessed. "She wants to know why I've been hiding you." Mrs. Kang's eyes moved from Rhonda to Micah with the surgical assessment of a woman who'd spent decades reading the truth beneath politeness. She smiled, but it wasn't the careful smile people gave Young Ho. It was knowing, ancient, the smile of a mother who'd watched her son become something she couldn't name, but still recognized the shape of his heart. Micah pressed closer to Rhonda's side as Mrs. Kang approached, but then she knelt, her aged knees cracking softly, and spoke to him in careful English. "You like dumplings? I make the best in Los Angeles. My son, he used to eat 20 in one sitting." 20. Micah's eyes went wide. He was very motivated. Mrs. Kang's gaze slid to Young Ho with unmistakable warmth. They sat at a corner table away from the handful of other diners, and the food arrived in waves. More than 3 people could possibly eat. Banchan in small dishes, steaming soon tofu stew, japchae glistening with sesame oil, and a platter of mandu that made Micah forget to be nervous. Young Ho ordered in Korean, his voice taking on cadences Rhonda had never heard, and she realized she was watching him slip between identities like a man changing clothes. "Here," Young Ho said, positioning chopsticks in Micah's small hands. His fingers were gentle, repositioning the boy's grip with infinite patience. "Like this. The top one moves, the bottom stays still." Micah's face scrunched in concentration, the chopsticks wobbling dangerously. "You're thinking too hard." Young Ho's thumb steadied Micah's hand. "Feel it. Trust your fingers." When Micah finally managed to lift a dumpling, trembling but triumphant, Young Ho's entire expression unlocked. Not the predatory satisfaction she'd seen when he eliminated threats, but something unguarded, proud, the way a father might look. From the counter, Mrs. Kang watched with eyes that had seen this transformation coming long before anyone else. She met Rhonda's gaze across the restaurant, and in that look passed an entire conversation. "I know what my son is. I know what he's done, but I also know what he could become, if you're brave enough." The dumpling made it to Micah's mouth, and his face exploded into joy. Young Ho smiled, really smiled, and Rhonda felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The monster knew how to be gentle. That was somehow more terrifying than anything else. Devin's face looked like it had been introduced to a concrete wall at high velocity. Fractured orbital socket, shattered jaw wired shut, 3 broken ribs, and a ruptured spleen that required emergency surgery. The official police report called it a mugging gone wrong in a parking structure downtown, but the detective's eyes told Rhonda he didn't believe a word of it. She stood in the hospital corridor, staring through the window at her ex-boyfriend's swollen, purple face, and felt absolutely nothing. No relief, no guilt, just the cold mathematics of cause and effect. Devin had put his hands on her for the last time. Young Ho had made sure of that. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it settled in her chest like a stone, heavy, permanent, undeniable. She made it home by 8 p.m., exhausted from her double shift at the diner. Micah was already asleep, his small body curled around his favorite dinosaur pillow. She was reaching for the kettle when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Official. Two men in cheap suits stood in her doorway, badges already out. FBI, Special Agents Morrison and Chun. They had questions about her relationship with Young Ho Kong. Rhonda's hands went numb. They sat at her kitchen table, the wobbly one she'd found on the curb and sanded down herself, asking how long she'd been cleaning Mr. Kang's residence, whether she'd ever witnessed unusual activities, whether she'd noticed frequent visitors or large amounts of cash. Their voices are professionally neutral, but their eyes cataloged everything. Micah's school drawings on the refrigerator, the overdue bills stacked on the counter, the new shoes by the door that she definitely couldn't afford on a maid salary. Mr. Kong is under investigation for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy, Agent Morrison said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by telling her this. People close to him tend to get caught in the blast radius. Agent Chin slid a business card across her table. If you know something, now's the time. Before you become collateral damage. They left 20 minutes later, and Rhonda sat in the dark long after their footsteps faded down the stairwell. This was the cost, not the violence itself. She'd already survived that with Devon. The cost was this. Federal agents in her home, their questions hanging in the air like smoke, the implicit threat that loving Young Ho meant choosing between his protection and her son's safety. She thought about Young Ho's hands, surprisingly gentle when he'd touched the bruise on her cheek, the way he'd looked at Micah in the restaurant, teaching him chopsticks with infinite patience, the man who'd promised her she would never be invisible again, and the monster who'd put her ex-boyfriend in the ICU without breaking a sweat. They were the same person. She picked up Agent Chen's card, stared at the phone number, then walked to the trash can and dropped it in. The knock came at 3:17 a.m., 3 precise raps that shattered the arithmetic of Rhonda's insomnia. She'd been awake since midnight, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked like a country she'd never visit, calculating for the 400th time whether accepting Young Ho's protection had purchased Micah's safety or mortgaged his future. Through the peephole, Young Ho looked like a drowned king. Rain had turned his white shirt transparent, plastered against shoulders that had carried the weight of a criminal empire for 15 years. His hair, usually slicked back with the precision of a man who controlled everything, hung loose and dripping, obscuring half his face. But not the neck tattoo. Never that. The black lotus bloomed dark and permanent against his throat, a brand that announced what he was before he ever opened his mouth. She opened the door, because leaving him out there felt more dangerous than letting him in. He didn't move, just stood in the fluorescent hallway light, looking like violence interrupted, like a weapon somebody had forgotten to fire. Water pooled at his feet, seeping into the cigarette-burned carpet her landlord refused to replace. The FBI came to see me tonight. His voice was stripped bare, nothing surgical or precise about it. Showed me photographs, wiretaps, bank transfers I thought I'd buried deep enough. He lifted his eyes, and Rhonda saw something she'd never seen before. Not vulnerability, exactly, but the exhaustion of a man who'd been holding his breath underwater for a decade and a half. They have 3 months of evidence, maybe 4, enough to build something that will eat the rest of my life. Micah shifted in his sleep down the hall, a small sound that made Young Ho's jaw tighten. "I can walk away," he said, and the words landed like an execution. "Right now, tonight, I have accounts they'll never find, passports under names that don't exist. I can dismantle everything I've built and disappear before the sun comes up." He stepped forward, close enough that she could see rain still caught in his eyelashes, close enough that the criminal and the man occupied the same breath. "Or I can stay and burn for what I've done. But I need you to tell me which man you want me to be." The hallway light flickered. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried. "Because if you ask me to leave, Rhonda, if you tell me that loving you isn't worth the destruction, I'll be gone before Micah wakes up. You'll never see the monster again." His hand rose, trembling slightly, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "But if you let me stay, I'll stand in the fire. I'll answer for everybody, every dollar, every sin. I'll become something new or die trying." She could smell the rain on him, the rain, and beneath it, something that smelled like surrender. Micah was building a Lego spaceship on the living room carpet when Young Ho arrived, and Rhonda watched her son's hands freeze mid-assembly. not from fear, but from the careful assessment children develop when adults have disappointed them enough times. Young-ho didn't crouch, didn't bend at the waist in that patronizing half-bow adults perform when they want to seem approachable. He sank to his knees on the worn carpet, silk trousers pressing into the same threadbare fibers, where Micah's knees had worn the pattern thin, and waited. The silence stretched like wire. Rhonda's pulse hammered against her throat. "You're the man who makes Mom smile different," Micah said finally, his 7-year-old voice carrying the flat suspicion of someone who'd learned to read adult departures the way other kids learned multiplication tables. "Yes." Young-ho's hands rested open on his thighs. No reaching. No presumption of affection. "I want to ask you something important." Adults always say that before they leave. The words landed like a blade between ribs. Rhonda started to intervene. "Baby, that's not fair." But Young-ho's hand rose fractionally, a gesture that said let him speak. "You're right," Young-ho said. "Adults lie about important things. They promise and then disappear." He paused, and Rhonda saw something crack open in his expression. Something raw that had nothing to do with the calculated violence he'd wielded against Devin. "Your father did that." Micah's jaw clenched. "You don't know him." "I know men like him. I was him once." Young-ho's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "So, I understand why you don't believe me. But I'm going to make you a promise anyway, and then you can decide if I'm lying." Micah's fingers tightened around the Lego spaceship. "What promise?" Young-ho inhaled slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same absolute certainty he'd used when dismantling his empire piece by deliberate piece. "I will never make your mother cry, and I will never leave." The words hung crystalline in the small apartment. Then Young-ho repeated them in Korean, each syllable deliberate, and weighted with the same finality men use when swearing blood oaths. "Yamaru Alrigi Anketa, Jurigo Tianaji Anketa." "What's that mean?" Micah asked, suspicious even of translations. "The same promise, in my first language. So you know I mean it in every part of me." Micah studied him with devastating focus, the kind of attention that sees through expensive watches and tailored suits straight into the architecture of a man's intentions. Rhonda held her breath. "Devin promised too," Micah said quietly. "He promised, and then he hurt her." "I know." Young-ho's hands remained open, steady. "So watch me, every day. And the first time I break this promise, you tell me to leave, and I will." Something shifted in Micah's expression. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. He placed one small hand in Young-ho's open palm. "Okay," Micah whispered. "But I'm watching." "Good," Young-ho said, and his voice fractured just enough for Rhonda to see the man who knelt before federal agents and chose her instead. "Never stop." The Los Angeles Times food critic called Rhonda's jerk chicken a revelation wrapped in smoke and defiance. The line for her catering tent stretched 40 deep into the community center parking lot, past the Korean barbecue booth run by Young-ho's mother, past the sponsorship banner that Red, Brown, and Kong Community Fund in letters tall enough to be seen from the freeway. Rhonda stood at the center of controlled chaos, her voice carrying over the sizzle of plantains and the rhythmic thud of her staff's knives against cutting boards. She wore her natural hair and crown of braids, the summer sun catching the amber undertone she spent 32 years hiding under tight buns and desperate invisibility. Her catering company employed 17 people now. 6 of them were formerly incarcerated. 3 were single mothers she'd met at the women's shelter, where she volunteered every Thursday. Not one of them was invisible. "Mom," the high school counselor called again. Micah appeared at her elbow, 13 years old and suddenly taller than her, holding her cell phone like it might explode. "She wants to talk about the honors track. And maybe like SAT prep already." Rhonda's hand stilled over the rice and peas. 5 years ago, SAT prep would have been a fantasy she couldn't afford to entertain. Now her son spoke about college applications the way other kids talk about video games. Casual, certain, inevitable. "Tell her I'll call Monday," Rhonda said, then caught his chin the way Young-ho always did, gentle but insistent. "And tell her your mama said you're taking every advanced class they offer." Micah grinned, the same crooked smile he'd given her in that apartment that smelled like mold and failure, and jogged back toward the basketball courts where Young-ho was teaching a dozen kids how to shoot free throws with the patience of someone who spent 15 years learning precision under pressure. Young-ho looked up as if he'd felt her watching. No suit today. Just jeans and a white t-shirt that didn't quite hide the mandala tattoo crawling up his neck. He said something to the kids and crossed the parking lot with that same predatory grace, except now it didn't make her flinch. Now it made her breath catch for entirely different reasons. "The mayor's here," he said, slipping his hand into hers with the ease of 5 years' practice. "Wants a photo with the Model Community Partnership." "You mean he wants your donation check?" "That too." Young-ho's thumb traced her wedding ring, the simple gold band they'd chosen together. "You ready?" Rhonda looked at her thriving business, at her son discussing calculus with Young-ho's nephew, at the community they'd built from blood money transformed into something clean. She thought about the woman who used to scrub floors with her eyes down, who believed visibility meant death. "I'm ready," she said, and stepped into the light beside him. Not behind, not hidden, radiant, deliberate, and perfectly, devastatingly seen. If this story touches you, please subscribe, like, and comment below to know how you feel.